So we are now online. Comme vous voulez. Okay, we're about to get started. So for the latest arriving in the room, please find a seat. Okay, let's start. So, sir, madam, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, both online on the French Air and Space Force YouTube channel, wherever you are watching us from, or here in the Roland Garros Auditorium at the Air and Space Museum of France. We are all gathered for the first edition of the EI2 Air and Space Power Conference. I am Colonel Richard Gros, Assistant Director at the French Air and Space Force Center for Air and Space Strategic Studies. As the program manager for this conference, I will have the privilege to represent my colleagues from the 13 EI2 Air Forces and to be your guide for this amazing two-day program we concocted you. We labeled the central theme of the conference the synchronization of strategic and operational tempos. To discuss it, you will hear on stage authorities in their domains, such as Air Forces chiefs, defense political directors, CEOs of European defense industries, directors and representatives of European think tanks, doctors and professors of global renown, journalists specialized in defense and security questions, civil and military representatives. We are honored by their presence and looking forward to hearing their perspective throughout the 8 roundtables and the keynote addresses on the agenda. Before we get started, allow me to detail the rules of engagement. First, to the speakers and moderators, I'd like to remind that the debates are not private, as they are broadcasted live worldwide. They will also be available on replay on the same media and should be put into writing to facilitate their referencing. Second, again to speakers and moderators, remember the rich schedule and therefore the necessity to respect timings. Third, I'd like to inform the public that it is possible to ask questions during the roundtables. To do so, you can either use the YouTube feed or the Twitter hashtag EI2 Airspace Power. For the attendees in the room, you can also use the numbers displayed on the board. Fourth, in case of an emergency during the event, we will have to stop the live broadcast and people in the room will be kindly requested to exit calmly through the closest exit indicated by the standard signs. Lastly, please silence your watches and cell phones so that we can have quiet debates. That being said, allow me to introduce our first speaker, Brigadier General Sabenet, the director of the French Air and Space Force Center for Air and Space Strategic Studies, who has some introductory remarks. a fighter pilot by trade, having flown on air defense and surface attack versions of the Mirage 2000, as well as on F-16 in the US, Brigadier General Sabenet has commanded the French Detection and Control Center in Nice, not a bad place to be, the French Air Base in Djibouti, another great location, and the French National Air Operations Center in Lyon before taking over his current position. Brigadier General Sabenet counts 2,400 flying hours and a dozen combat missions. Sir, over to you.
Dear distinguished guests, it's both an honor and a privilege to be welcoming you today at the very beginning of this EI2 Air and Space Conference. Since the two-day long program is packed with guest speakers way smarter than myself, I'll be short and will bring up only 3 items. First, I would like to express my gratitude to the following persons. To my boss, General Lavigne. Thank you, sir, for trusting us in organizing this huge event, international event, which is a premiere in this format. To the lead coordinator, Colonel Gros, and his deputy, Colonel Joannick, who were able to move mountains to make this happen, despite the pandemic. And finally, to the director of the Bourget Air and Space Museum, Mrs. Robert Augustin, who greeted us here with open arms, giving us access to this fantastic place, which is probably the most iconic aviation museum in the world. Secondly, I welcome this outstanding opportunity for us to exchange amongst the EI2 community and beyond on what we cherish dearly: air and space power. You might not win all wars with airmen alone, but you will lose definitely any war if you end up being number 2 in the fight for air and space superiority. Lastly, allow me please to introduce our brand new publication called Vortex, which aims at becoming an international reference on air and space power. Released twice a year and published both in French and in English. I'm delighted to have one copy distributed to each of you, and this is the very first issue and brand new issue today provided to you. Multi-domain C2 is the main topic we chose for Vortex number 1. To conclude, I would like to share with you a French proverb we like in the Air Force. Tout seul, on va plus vite, mais ensemble, on va plus loin. For the non-French speakers, here is the English translation. Alone, you might go faster, but together, you will definitely go farther. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir. It is now my honor to welcome on stage General Philippe Lavigne, Chief of Staff of the French Air and Space Force, for the grand opening address. Before rising to his current position, General Lavigne enjoyed a rich career. He joined the Armée de l'Air, the then Armée de l'Air, in 1985 as a pilot. During the first part of his career, he served in Fighter Squadron, flying on Mirage 2000s. General Lavigne commanded at all levels, from flight level to Air Force level. To name but a few commands, I'd like to underline the 1-5 Fighter Squadron Vendée, based in Orange, where I had the honor to start my own career. a couple years ago, the Kabul International Airport in Afghanistan, and the Air Force Fighter Brigade. General Lavigne also served several tours in headquarters at air, joint, and interagency levels. General Lavigne is graduated from the French Air Force Academy, the French War College, and the CHEM, which is Professional Military Education Level 3. General Lavigne counts more than 2,800 flying hours on several types and 46 combat missions. Finally, sir, if you allow me, and as many know already, I'd like to mention that you are fond of rugby. As a native of Bergerac, it may come at no surprise. Having had the honor to serve under your command, I personally think that you find in this sport many of the values you deem essential to the profession of arms: respect, esprit de corps, and fortitude. I hope you'll agree with me. Now, sir, the floor is yours.
So, dear Chief of Air Staff, dear Javier, dear Karl Johan, I know that Mike is going to arrive, Alberto and Marios. Defense Policy Director, I know that Madam Alice Guiton is going to join us. Dear CEOs from Aerospace Company, dear Eric, thank you very much to be here. Dear Bruno, good morning. General officers and senior officers from all the services, Air Forces obviously, but also the Army, the Navy, and Defense Procurement Agency, professors, doctors, ladies and gentlemen. So it's my privilege to declare open this first of a kind conference co-organized by 13 European Intervention Initiative Air Forces that the French Air and Space Force has the honor to host at the Air and Space Museum of France. On behalf of my 12 counterparts of the other EI2 Air Forces, I'd like to thank our partners who have contributed to this endeavor. The French aerospace sector, first represented by GFAS, the industrial, Dassault, Airbus, MBDA, Thales, Safran, and Ariane Group, the Directorate General for International Relations and Strategy, who will be represented by her directors. I'd also like to thank the teams of the EA2 Air Forces that have consistently worked over the past year to make this project a reality. And I insist on that, work over the past year. So, to name but a few, many thanks to Javier, Anne-Linke, Antonio, José, Linelis, Olivier, Saku, Janus, Dominique, Matthias, Pekka, Jacob. On the French side, let me underline the critical role played by the airmen and the commanding officer of the Creil Air Force Base, Colonel Hervé Mermot, and teams of General Julien Sabenet, the director of the Center of the Aerospace Strategic Studies. Dear Julien, I know the efforts that all your staff have made, especially Colonel Richard Gros, in charge of this event, and his very close staff, Colonel Joannick, and First Lieutenant Lucas. Hosting such conference is a complex and long-term project that began in November 2020. Your collective efforts over the past months, weeks, and days have paid off. Let's have a look on the quality of the panel. There are representatives from all countries in the audience. Defense policy directors, managers from defense industries, military leaders, leading experts from air and space mission. So I would like to have a particular attention to professors and doctors of European think tank who are going to moderate the roundtable. Thank you so much for your engagement. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you in this room of the Air and Space Museum of France, and let me thank you again very sincerely to the director of this huge museum. Many thanks, Anne-Catherine, to have opened the doors and maybe the secrets, some secrets of this outstanding place. Some of you had the opportunity to travel to join us. I know the efforts you have made in your busy diaries to come and honor us with your presence. I hope that your efforts will be rewarded by the quality of the discussion and also by the visit of the Air and Space Museum that will be offered to you this evening. The Air and Space Museum is an incredible museum that makes us realize that the history of airmen is intimately linked to the history of aerostation, aeronautics, and aerospace. It preserves rare pieces and treasures, ancestral kites, wicker baskets that testify to the first balloon ascents, wooden and canvas aircraft, sounding rockets, and space capsules. This museum finally shows us that we still feel in our daily lives, in our respective air forces, that the conquest of the third dimension is a wonderful human adventure. Some of you are with us by video conference for reasons beyond your control. We all hope that we will come through the world COVID pandemic and that we will be able to meet us again. Looking at all of you, I realize the great diversity and therefore the richness of European intervention initiative. The EI2 was launched 3 years ago. EI2 looks for a sovereign, united and democratic Europe able to guarantee security in all its dimensions. We also welcome with great pleasure people who are not from EI2 countries. This event is also accessible in live, as you say, Richard, through the YouTube channel of the French Air Space Force. We will thus be able to present our points of view, which will certainly be plural, because they are the result of our specificities, incomplete transparencies, and frankness to all over the world. EA2 is a forum to share our different point of views to be stronger together, thinking about how we can enhance interaction and where we need to go. This diversity is not a weakness, but rather than a strength. The purpose of this conference is not to talk about a single path, quite the contrary. Our ambition during these 2 days is to understand each other better. That is the core ambition of the EI2. Shared strategic culture that would enhance the ability of its members to define where they need to go and to act together on mission as part of NATO, the EU, UN, or other ad hoc coalitions. And as the French writer and airman Antoine de Saint-Exupéry wrote, "The other, far from harming me, enriches me." Defining this ambition is demanding. It is so much comfortable to discuss the instruments. Together, we must build a common strategic culture, even if we do not have the same parliamentary, historical, political culture, or the same sensitivities. We may not agree on everything, but we will discuss everything. Let's talk about our European ambition for air and space power. We are gathered to discuss what is the daily basis of our professional concern as a chief of air staff, the ability to use air and space capabilities to achieve air and space missions. I think it is very important that we have this moment of reflection together to get away from the tyranny of the short time and to reflect our responsibilities. This air and space power is essential for the expression of military power and more broadly of a power that Raymond Aron has characterized in Paix et guerre entre les nations as the ability of a political unit to impose its wills on others. I think that it is our responsibilities as Air Chief, as Chief of Air Staff, of generating with a great efficacy this air and space power. The question is how to create this air and space power. We could debate for days about strategy to achieve this. I would like to express two fundamental ideas which complement each other rather than oppose each other. The first way to generate this power is to determine a final state and then to define the action sequence we need to achieve this final state. It allows us to solve the most complex problems, to optimize our actions, to be effective while being efficient. The second way to generate this power is to observe the present situation, to be on the lookout for opportunities that will appear and to be able to seize them very quickly. It is very important and sometimes we forget it, but it is the best way to surprise our opponents. It is also a question of keeping a close eyes on the major underlying trends against which we can only fight with difficulty. This planning capacity, but also this agility that I have just described are fundamental in our air and space operation. It is my personal view that I delivered in a document called Agility and Strength you have in your hands. The working group proposed that we all talk about synchronizing strategic and operational tempos during these 2 days. I found the idea very fascinating. Indeed, air and space power has for me a singular relationship to space-time. Air and space power excel in short time, the time of reaction, of immediacy, which enables crises to be diffused or political will be determined, but air and space power also requires a high level of vision, a long-term perspective in order to project itself into the future. And this is a recurring difficulty for our air forces in a very large numbers of areas. Construction of aeronautical equipment, training of personnel, planning and conduct of air and space mission. It takes time to generate power, but at the same time you have to know how to remain agile in order to adapt the unpredictability that is bound to come. We need to remain agile and powerful. That is also a difficulty for other services, but I think that is an incredible challenge to our air forces. For example, implement complex and time-consuming equipment, but who must also adapt to the surprises we will encounter on a battlefield once we implement the equipment. Several challenges await us in the coming years to continue to generate the air and space power that is essential to political power. I would like to highlight 3 of them. First, we need our freedom of action, particularly facing A280 systems in order to keep the air superiority, which is a prerequisite for any joint operation. We need a large panel of state-of-the-art equipment available for combat in numbers. Second, data management within our organization become crucial in order to keep our information and decision-making superiority. We need it to share, to analyze, to use better the data we generate on a daily basis or collect on the battlefield. And third, the technical dimension of our equipment must not make us forget that our most precious resource remains the airmen. Our organization must free up energies and allow our airmen to innovate. It is important to me that the airmen remain masters of the highly technical equipment entrusted to us, always asking themselves about the potential consequences of their actions. This is essential at the time when progress in the field of artificial intelligence, for example, is breathtaking. This is my personal observation after almost 3 years at the head of the French Air Space Force. I will not go into more detail today on the solution that need to be found to meet all these challenges. I am, however, very interested in what we are going to say to each other during these 2 days. The program is very attractive, and all areas are covered. It is with great pleasure that I will leave my place behind these desks in a few moments to Mr. Trappé, dear Eric, chairman of GFAS. Then Madame Alice Guiton will then do us the honor of opening the first roundtable, the first one by speaking on European strategic culture. We will then look at how we conduct armament programs, air and space missions, supporting other forces, for instance. We'll try to identify what allows us to be together plug and fight. It's a word from Ingo, which is the German air chief, and he will be with us tomorrow in VTC. Tomorrow, we will look at the very particular way in which Airmen Command Operation adapt their equipment to the reality of operations and how we learn our engagement to always be more efficient. Finally, it is with great pleasure that I will meet you again at the last roundtable before having the privilege of listening to Madam Florence Parly, French Minister of Armed Forces. It is therefore a very dense program. We will thus have the pleasure of seeing some 50 prestigious speakers from a wide range of backgrounds on this stage or by video conference. Thank you again for your participation, and I wish you all excellent exchanges and a long life to the European International Initiative. Thank you very much. Maybe I want to say I just want to add something. It's just a news. What is air power also? During the last 2 days, for example, air power is the mission we have made with the French Air and Space Force with 3 Rafale, 2 MRTTs, 2 A400M, and about 180 airwomen and airmen. We took off from France. It was on a Sunday morning from different airfield. Then we flew directly to US. It was a 12-hour flight. And we had single-seaters, Rafale, and two single-seater Rafale and one dual-seater Rafale. So it's a long way. And then the day after, on morning, we took off again, and we flew to Papet, the French Polynesia. And so it was also a very long flight. It's about 9 hours. Then we had a mission there. What is exceptional is not only the hours of flight. All of the thing was planned and conducted by our C2, which is in Lyon-Montverdun. And we've got the ability to make multi-domain in this C2. That means, of course, air, but space and cyber. And so the result is a flight towards the Polynesia, and so we joined. It's more than 17,000 kilometers in 39 hours, 8 minutes, and 24 seconds. So it's quite amazing. And what we are going there, it's to, of course, to demonstrate that we can protect our citizens, our French citizens, in so far area. And so then, of course, to demonstrate what we are able, that's what air power is able to do in such quick time. Then we will demonstrate, of course, our capability, our equipment, the Rafale, the MRTT, the A400M, of course. And then we will go back in about 6 days through Hawaii. So we will cooperate also because, as I said, plug and fight is essential. So we have to train together. And so we will train on the way back with PACAF and with Cruiser, his chief. And the former, I just remind you that the former PACAF is CQ Brown, which is our colleague from the USAF. And then we will be back through Langley Air Force Base also, and also train with the F-22s of the first and Langley Air Force Base. So it's and then back in France, and we will be back in France the 9th of July. So it's a huge demonstration of what air power can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It is now time to welcome on stage Mr. Éric Trappier, President of GIFAS Board. Sir, as I introduce you in your capacity of President of GIFAS Board, I realize I could have rather chosen President of UIMM, President of CDEF Board, Chairman of Dassault Falcon Jet, Chairman of Dassault International, and of course, Chairman and CEO of Dassault Aviation. As GIFAS is, with the support of Airbus, Ariane Group, Dassault, MBDA, Safran, and Thales, the main partner to this event, it is nevertheless in this capacity of President of GIFAS Board that we have the pleasure of having you here now. Before giving you the mic, allow me to remind the audience that you started your career in Dassault Aviation right after college. In the company, the successive position you were entrusted with in the International Directorate, then as VP, Middle East and Africa, VP International in charge of sales worldwide, Senior VP International and Executive VP International, shown your natural inclination for international relations writ large, a quality that, lucky for us, is a perfect fit for this event. Sir, thank you for your present. Over to you.
Dear Chief of Staff of French Air and Space Force, dear Philippe, dear Chief of Air Staff, General and Senior Officers, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues and friends. Number one, to introduce, I am not a pilot, and I have to maybe excuse myself in front of such distinguished Air Force pilots. I am only an engineer, and as it was reminded, I started my career in Dassault Aviation a long time ago. So I've been able to exercise the engineering work in the design office before to focus on international relationship, sales, contracting, and supporting our customers worldwide. It is today my great pleasure that I have accepted the proposal of Philippe to speak in front of you and for this opening of this symposium. I thank him very much for this opportunity. These 2 days are taking place in an international context marked by an unstable situation in terms of security. To this, I would like to add that the COVID-19 has not helped to organize such an event. And it is for this reason that it is very important that this symposium could have been taken today and be held today, and that the 13 countries that are part of this initiative you mentioned, Philippe, an ambitious initiative of an operational nature aimed at fostering the emergence of a common European strategic culture and creating the preconditions for future coordinated and jointly prepared engagement. Launched almost 3 years ago on June 25th, 2018, this still recent initiative has already demonstrated its potential and strengths, the one that brings us together today. I am therefore honored to speak in front of such audience, as I said, made up of general officers, not only pilots, I suppose, but mainly pilots, senior officers, industrials, and experts for this conference dedicated to the synchronization of strategic and operational tempos. I will speak twice this morning, sorry. Later, I will take part in a roundtable discussion as a CEO of Dassault Aviation, but I would like first now to say a few words on behalf of GIFAS, the French Aerospace Industries Association. These 2 days are important as there will be no Le Bourget Air Show, as you know, because of this sanitary health condition situation. It is therefore timely and useful to keep this moment of exchange between the air forces and the industry to advance in the European strategic culture in the field of aerospace power. This moment of exchange is important because it is an opportunity to discuss and meet the users. Moreover, the international context, as I said, makes this type of meeting even more essential. Air forces are demanding users because the missions they carry out are demanding. The lessons learned, we call it retex in French, are very important for us to be understood in order to prepare the future requirement and the future systems. The air forces are also users who are committed to the evolution of their equipment and are constantly thinking about what will constitute the next missions. It is therefore essential for us, industry, to design, to develop, to manufacture, and to maintain all along their life the systems and equipment of our armed forces to be able to dialogue as much as possible with you in order to better suit your operational needs, the ways in which you use systems and equipment, and the way in which you think the air combat of the future. The relationship, this close cooperation, is important in a tense international context. You may see around, and you know better than I know, many powerful states use military dimension to support their policy. It may be a concern for their neighbors. It may be a concern for the allied nations of these neighbors. So we are witnessing move of these states in both the offensive and defensive fields. Moreover, free access to technologies or means allow also terrorist movement to temporarily break the balance of power. The response to this development is to adapt equipment to your needs as much as possible, as well as to make the best possible use of technology so as to increase the effects of your weapon system and give you a step ahead of the enemy at all times. The tempo, always the tempo, the common guidelines of our 2 days. For example, for many years, we have been developing the Rafale. And we are continuing, and not only the Rafale, but also the Mirage 2000. And we have been continuously update the weapon system in order to face the evolution of the threats. So I'm sure it's not only the Rafale, it's also the other fighters in Europe. And we focus for the future mainly on connectivity, because we believe that also the combat is going to change in this field. So connectivity is really a key, and new types of weapons, sometimes with better effect and often for better accuracy. But we also prepare the future, and I'm sure you know about FCAS, the Future Combat Air System. We are preparing with 3 states, France, Germany, and Spain. It's about a new fighter, but it's not only about a new fighter. It's also about a network, a system of systems. It's also about remote carrier, which may be operational in parallel of the fighters and in connection with the fighters. And it's also about maybe UCAV. We also have to face what could be a UCAV operational capability in parallel. So it's really these studies are important to prepare the future, and technology is really something in which we need to work together in order to prepare this future system, and demonstrators in order to check that the technology is mature is a must to prepare what could be a future development. Of course, this needs to focus on a long-term mobilization of the state's budget, as well as an appropriate governance with leadership, with work share, with work package, and it needs a permanent exchange with the air forces, which contributes to this future preparation to be sure to meet the expectations of the operational forces. Speaking as chairman of GIFAS, I will not only concentrate on fighters, but also all the other types of systems. And the French aerospace industry, as you know, is one of the most advanced in the world. And whether by itself or in cooperation, this industry is one of the major suppliers to air forces. May I mention to you A400M, MRTT, helicopters, C2 systems, radars, EW, various number of systems which are development within our groupement, GIFAS, with French industry at the top. Thank you, Philippe, to mention the Rafale associated with the A400 and the MRTT in order to be able to deploy itself very far from home base. This is an example of what could be also the preparation of the future in terms of capabilities. I would like to say a short word to my partners, Airbus, Safran, Thales, MBDA, Ariane Group. All these companies, members of GIFAS, are partners of the French Air and Space Force for this symposium dedicated to air and space power. I would not forget space, because if not, Philippe will not be happy, and I like my user to be very happy with industry. So in the field of space, we also need to work, and we are at work, in order to keep our freedom of action in this dimension. It's a place where we need to develop means to place in orbit the knowledge of systems in order to get the situation awareness, and the coordination of action, which is also something important to prepare the future. So obviously, I have a word for our Minister of Armed Forces, Mrs. Florence Parly, who launched this initiative and this new organization about the space defense strategy, which I'm sure will be supported by the next speech. This type of strategy is part of a long-term perspective, because it is essential to be able to master the long term. The long term means committing a coherent budgetary effort in research as well as in the development of systems, by exploring the potential of all technology, current, proven, and emerging, so as not to neglect those which will give us a decisive advantage. For sure, European cooperation is a must for space development, because the huge amount of money needed to really be at the top of this level is a must. And look at what China is doing, or others. I'm sure that you know properly well what has to be done in order to be at this level. So as we say in France, money, budget, in French, c'est le nerf de la guerre, mean the fuel for war. So far, we have been relying mainly on our national budget of defense to finance research and development in our respective countries. For those of you who are in an EU member state or in a country closely associated to the EU, there is now a new player in that domain, the European Union, with the European Defence Fund. What is at stake? This fund? It is devoted to promote the competitiveness and innovation capacity of the European defense and technological and industrial base, and to achieve greater interoperability between the capabilities of the member states, thus contributing to the EU's strategic autonomy. This is also one of the topics of our meeting today. I will mention two important points regarding this fund. Europe, through the Commission, does not have the vocation with the European Defence Fund to substitute itself for the member states in the field of research and development. The member states must continue their budgetary efforts in this area. Furthermore, in order to optimize expenditure, we must concentrate our efforts on a limited number of projects and technologies which will lead to the development of capabilities which will be useful for the armed forces. It is important that the financing mechanism for the fund's project do not destabilize national operations, as national funding and European grants are no substitutes. The fund must be an efficient tool that complements the national defense planning, the military program law, for example, in France, in order to meet the priority needs of our forces. This defense fund should be implemented in a very pragmatic way. The logic of industrial excellence and performance must remain at the heart of the consortia mechanism. Finally, I would like to come back on the main objective of this European Defence Fund, that is to say, the reinforcement of the strategic autonomy of the EU. The research and development effort should lead to the development of new capabilities which will then be acquired by the EU member states. This aspect is certainly the most important. I also want to share with you a concern. Financing coming from the private financial institution is also crucial to support industry because they are the shareholders. So I would like to call your attention on the fact that there is in Europe a growing risk of execution of the defense industry, of the exclusion, of the defense industry from sources of finances. This risk is taking on a new dimension as a concept of sustainable finance defined by ESG, environment, social and governance criteria, is taking more and more steam. There is a strong misconception that defense is not sustainable or not contributing to the sustainability of the society. The European Commission is trying to standardize these criteria so that the financial world uses the same criteria, at least in Europe. And we have seen examples of such misconception being supported by some people in our European institutions. There is, for example, a project of eco-label for financial products where a company could be excluded if more than 5% of its turnover comes from the production or trade in conventional arms or military products used for combat. The exclusion of the defense industry through these schemes contribute to the construction of the idea that our defense industries are not sustainable. This is not true. Defense industries contribute to the security of their countries, of their states, of Europe. I would not say that we had before the aviation bashing. Now we have the defense bashing. So we need really to react against this type of big ideas. So this is a real issue that affects the acceptability of the defense industry by the public opinion. It is thus increasingly threatened with potential effects on financing, recruitment, export authorization, the possibility of investing in new technologies such as IA, autonomous systems, surveillance system, and quantum. This subject requires our total vigilance. I would like to conclude on some aspects. Most European states participate in the European project, which include a growing defense dimension and the ambitions to assume as a union responsibilities on the global scene. This also implies achieving an appropriate level of strategic autonomy and technical sovereignty so that it has the capacity to decide and act to defend its interest alone if necessary or with partners when appropriate. And I would like to say that this is not at all in opposition with NATO requirement. On the contrary, to be a credible partner, Europe must have defense capabilities and the ability to use them at the level of its declared ambition. The European defense industry is a crucial element in this endeavor. It can assure security of supply and freedom of action by ensuring that design capabilities. It also provides operational advantage to armed forces by enabling in-depth understanding of relevant defense systems and their underlying technologies. For some capabilities, this could be an essential precondition for European governments to have guaranteed autonomous use of those defense systems. And I would say, and I would add also, that something important with our partners is interoperability. We need to develop the full total capability of being interoperable among partners in Europe, but also with our allied partners in the world. European military capability and defense industrial know-how are therefore very linked. I would like to conclude by telling you that I ensure you, on behalf of the French industry and to you, Air Forces present today, in your mission, that you have the full support of the French aerospace industry, and I hope you will enjoy the 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It is now time to start our first roundtable entitled European Air Power and Space Control in a Context of Power Competition. To moderate the discussions of EA2 defense political directors that he will himself introduce, be they present here in Paris or remotely, we have the privilege of welcoming Dr. Xavier Pascaud, Director of the Foundation for Strategic Research, FRS. Dr. Pascaud holds a PhD in political science from the University of Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne. Having initially lectured and conducted researches in that field, Dr. Pascaud is now specialized in space policy, high technology, and security. He is conducting and coordinating research on these topics in France, in Europe, and in the US. He has written, directed, or contributed to many books, studies, articles, and reports. Sir, thank you for your presence. The floor is yours.
Dear Chief of Staff of the Air and Space Force, dear Chief of Staff of Air Forces, directors, general officers, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very, very happy to be here with you today. I'm Xavier Pascaud, director of the Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique. And I'm very happy to welcome you all for this opening session, the first of what I think will be a series of fruitful exchanges and discussions in the framework of this European Intervention Initiative. Our first roundtable will address the importance of the European air power and space control in a context of power competition. And I'll be happy to engage our panelists, whether on stage or online, to share their views on these issues. Each of the panelists will have a few minutes, we have time, to highlight what they see, what they consider as key elements to be considered to improve the efficiency of air and space defense in Europe. As been indicated as a guideline for this whole conference, better coordination and synchronization at strategic and operational tempo may be considered as a key objective, an objective of utmost importance nowadays in a context where we all consider, practitioners, observers, the resurgence of high-intensity warfare as a strong possibility. Renewed high-intensity conflicts may be part of the future European military landscape, and even the current one. And the European military engagements of tomorrow will oblige us to prepare to face this possible state of play. For Europe, and for those willing and able European nations as represented here today, keeping an edge in the air and space dimensions can be considered as a strategic investment, as demonstrated by the strategic and military dynamics that have been taking place in the immediate environment of Europe, whether it's in the Middle East, in the Gulf, or more largely in our Mediterranean environment, as well as on the eastern border of Europe. Even toughest military challenges will have to be tackled. This is true for all domains, but this is particularly true for the air and space domain. I will just mention a few examples, and the discussion, I'm sure, will enrich our discussion a lot on this aspect, but it's been already mentioned, A2AD, anti-access area denial postures based on air defense systems with cutting-edge technologies. I think about this modern air defense system S-300, S-400, for example. They've been largely spread these last years, and they pose increasing risks for any military operation involving air capabilities. Because all this raise obviously capability issues, by the way, and it's been evoked also, that must be in sufficient number to be able to weigh in a decisive manner in operation. The critical mass of capabilities is certainly, in this respect, a first aspect to consider on a European-wide basis. But all this will also call for a more complete, let's say, suppression of enemy air defense systems at the disposal of the European military players. Such systems relying in turn on state-of-the-art intelligence and data collection capabilities. All in all, new threats that are facing us of this sort will have to be dealt with by harnessing high technologies as well as by having at our disposal sufficient capabilities to act when it is necessary while keeping our ability to perform accompanying mission. And I'm thinking here to a strategic air transport mission, for example, which is also something that must not be a weak link in our defense today. So all these associated missions can only benefit, in my view, from more cooperative and more complementary capabilities. Both developing such systems to use them in a more synchronized and dynamic fashion will also allow us keeping up with the mounting threats. Interoperability, connectivity, the word has been mentioned already, are keywords here. Because this goes hand in hand with improved coordination of air deployment at the European level when needed, leading to genuine European air presence as such, based on the sharing of air infrastructures or other elements. At least, I think this can be seen as a way forward for like-minded European nations, helping them taking care of hardly permissive environments. This is being done already. But beyond such operations that we experience today, Europe, along with NATO maybe, and certainly, will also have to prepare against evolving high technology threats. And one of the most emblematic being, for example, and we look at that in the think tanks, in research centers very much with a great attention, hypersonic technologies. Such programs may soon translate into completely new military and strategic threats. And again here, this threat will have to be addressed in a comprehensive manner. Here, the global performance of air and space capabilities, and it's been mentioned also several times. And I myself, of course, I'm inclined to look at this with a particular attention. The global performance of air and space capabilities will account for a large part in our collective capability to deal with this kind of threats, this kind of emerging threat. For example, improving early warning, improving data collection capabilities may take benefit from the current dynamics in the space technologies. We see that worldwide. The mounting, I would say, infrastructure-related orientations in the field of mega satellite constellations, for example. That may be very useful to develop more effective C2 systems, whether it deals with sensors, whether it deals with connectivity and telecommunication. But this will depend, of course, on our continued ability to guarantee our full autonomous access to space and to protect and defend our security assets in space. All this is a logical continuation, and this is something certainly I know we are focusing in. We all know about this US catchphrase that affirms that space has become a congested, contested, and competitive environment. For sure, we have to deal with a more uncertain environment than before, at the very moment when we have never been so much dependent on our space capabilities to carry out military mission. So we have some sort of an antagonistic move here, and so we have to organize in a way that takes this increasing dependency into account and prepares for ensuring a better understanding of this increasingly complex environment. And this explains why a number of nations, including France, has produced this new space defense strategy. Has been mentioned by Mr. Trappier in the previous intervention. And it has led also to build new organizations taking fully dedicated to ensuring that space capabilities are fully operational, protected, but also integrated in the larger joint defense system. So to summarize, I won't want to be too long here because we will have a lot of material to discuss about with the intervention of the directors here. A few elements to keep in mind. The rising possibility of high-intensity conflicts. I think this is a marking element of our strategic horizon. We have also to understand that to face this, we need to be better coordinated. That's for sure, better organized, collectively, individually, and collectively. And for sure, these two stages, member states, European regional coordination must be done in a parallel path and be clearly articulated. And there's a need to step up on defense space postures, certainly, to face more and more risky situations with possible catastrophic consequences for our defenses. So I just want to, I could have quoted some other issues. I just want to highlight these three ones, just because that could be a guiding principle for our coming discussion. So I will now introduce the panel, and maybe we will have the first intervention. I welcome all the directors. And the director, thank you for being with us online. And I will maybe pass the mic to Mrs. Alice Guiton, Ambassador Guiton, who is Director General for International Relations and Strategy of the Ministry of Armed Forces in France. And dear Alice, I just want to leave you the floor.
Général Lavigne, cher Philippe, Monsieur le Président, General and Senior Officers, distinguished colleagues and friends online or in this room, let me start by congratulating you, Philippe, very warmly for this initiative. This is the first of its kind, the first intended to foster the development of true strategic air and space culture among Europeans, and we need it. That's the starting point. I know you're fond of rugby, I'm too, so I'm tempted to quote Pierre Villepreux as a foreword. In a rugby team, there are no bystanders, there is only one crew. And following that logic, thank you again for having brought together the air crew of the I2 members in all its different dimensions, military, industry, and of course political, to address the questions of air and space power in the context of great power competition. Philippe, I think you've scored a try, and it's now the responsibility of all of us to convert it and to try to make the best use of those full 2 days of conversations, and through that round table, of course, to reach out to my fellow defense political directors and representatives in order to bring an additional perspective on your debates this morning. A few reflections, and in fact 5 of them that I want to make before leaving the floor to my colleagues. First of all, Xavier, you referred to it, but we are facing the ever-growing contest of Western air superiority through the dissemination of anti-access area denial. And of course, this includes integrated air defense systems and long-range strike capabilities. Admittedly, Russia remains the most obvious and demanding challenge in the Euro-Atlantic area, as epitomized by the illegal annexation of Crimea, or of course its long-lasting posture of strategic intimidation, be it in the Baltics or around the Black Sea, or including in the north of the Atlantic. Yet, A2AD capabilities are no longer the prerogative of great powers only. You mentioned S-400, Russian S-400. There are also some regional powers contesting access to the air domain, and we see it notably in the Mediterranean. Ultimately, A2AD represents a major challenge to power projection, of course. As such, dedicated resources and cutting-edge top-level capacities are needed to overcome the ever-growing contest of Western air superiority, and of course to preserve, to retain our capability to project power, including in scenarios where we know that high intensity may be required. We also know that there are a number of scenarios, cases like what we observed in Libya, Syria, Nagorno-Karabakh conflicts, that have highlighted how massive use of affordable tactical drones and loitering munitions could be used by regional powers to coerce their neighbors. Think also about the strategic effect of the attack on Aramco key oil capabilities facilities in September 2019. It reveals crucial vulnerabilities and, of course, challenges as to how we will respond to future air attacks that need to urgently be addressed. So that was the first point, how we preserve that cutting-edge Western air superiority, noting how our adversaries, rivals, may be developing their own structures. The second challenge concerns Air Force generation in Europe. Obviously, we know the facts. The fighter force has shrunk of more than a quarter since 2000, in particular in Europe. I think the decrease in Europe is of 59%, 27% in the United States, 37% in France. And in addition, we know that European nations suffer from a lack of both strategic airlift and air-to-air refueling capabilities. There are other gaps as well, and I think those need to be taken into consideration, like ammunitions, or suppression of enemy air defenses capabilities that are also very useful. At the same time, looking at what happens in Europe, that decrease, looking at those challenges, some of the loopholes, we know that Washington is increasingly looking towards Asia-Pacific, and we also do, I must say. But we cannot, what we should learn from that is the fact that we cannot only rely on American combat air force in Europe to be able to dwarf an aggression in the event of a major crisis. We also need to take up our responsibilities as Europeans together. Therefore, the question for us is as follows. How can we collectively generate enough European ready for combat air power to maintain air superiority in the context of great power competition? It means that we will have to rediscover, and you alluded to that, Xavier, the value of numbers, Philippe as well. Be it on stockpiles, on platforms, on airmen, and this will require, at the national and even more so at the collective level, the European level, to find innovative ways of solving the quantity versus quality dilemma. Wicked question indeed, but it is paramount for us to restore a favorable and sustainable balance of power, and to do it in the long run. To do so, of course, we have assets as well. We need a competitive and innovative European defense, technological and industrial base, fostering cooperation between member states. This is crucial to use the full leverage from EU defense initiatives, CARD, European Defence Fund, PESCO, while looking for expanding, co-funding cross-border defense R&D and innovation. Third remark I wanted to make this morning, just to, of course, stimulate the conversation with colleagues. We need, of course, to focus on the ability to operate seamlessly as an alliance or as a coalition, including in a very reactive way. That may be a deciding factor to be able to team up if necessary. And as such, we have to maintain, of course, a sufficient level, and I would say a good level, of interoperability between the oldest and the latest generations of air platforms, be it manned or unmanned. Interoperability, for instance, with the F-35 remains an open question, and I think we should address it collectively, openly, frankly, as a critical key to success for future combined air operations in the air domain. And here, I think initiatives like Atlantic Trident, which brought together the latest generation of fighters last May in the southwest of France, was particularly helpful in order to facilitate the creation of common procedures for use in contested airspaces. I also think that part of the work carried out by the air pillar of PESCO project ECOWAR, or the ADF project Collaborative Air Combat, could help shape norms and standards, thereby allowing an optimal use of future air power in Europe. Of course, I can only refer as well to the FCAS NGWS program, which carries out an ambitious agenda regarding connectivity, which clearly is on the most prominent challenge for cooperative air combat. And I hope that this conference will help addressing and at least putting on the table a number of key questions regarding connectivity and its implications for C2 structures in the future and political control. My fourth remark has to do with what can air power do when confronting with hybrid strategies. I mean, they have a political role in itself. They represent an excellent tool of strategic signaling to respond to any kind of intimidation in a balanced and non-escalatory manner. For example, you referred, General, to the number of exercises that were carried out recently. There was one that was conducted mid-March on a large-scale joint counterterrorism exercise off the Crete Island. And with a strong contribution from the air power, we demonstrated as France our willingness to participate in preserving the security and stability in the Mediterranean zone alongside our allies, and it represents a way of reassuring, of course, our key partners. More broadly speaking, air power can create political and military effects on the full range of the spectrum and contribute to the four strategic functions, namely anticipation, deterrence, protection, prevention, and power projection. And you referred to that deployment, ambitious deployment to Polynesia. I know that you have the ambition to scale up in 2023, that level of ambition with the projection of 20 Rafale, 10 A3, 10 MRTT at more than 20,000 kilometers away in less than 48 hours. I'm honestly impressed. This is another kind of signaling to whom it concerns of both credibility and readiness. Last, of course, I cannot yield the floor without mentioning space, recognized as a domain of strategic competition, rivalry, potential confrontation. European nations, I think, today have no other choice but to develop a shared strategic culture in the space domain to overcome current and future challenges in that area where we see competition, strategic and industrial competition taking place, thus threatening our freedom of access and action in this area. We need to make sure that we embrace all the challenges related to the potential technological and industrial breakthroughs, giving rise to new types of dangers, as well as the degradation of relations between major powers. I think it's key as well to make sure that we can identify unfriendly activities or show forces and respond to them. There are a number of maneuvers that do exist, anti-satellite launches, but also proximity maneuvers, jamming of positioning systems, and they're all worrisome because, of course, they may trigger the creation of long-lived debris and, of course, pose a challenge to strategic stability. And in that respect, obviously, we decided to take up our responsibilities as France by drawing up a space defense strategy in 2019, recognizing the strategic importance of satellites for security and prosperity for France and our partners, as well as in response to the intensification of threats and risks. I think this document retains a number of key aspects. First of all, the need to develop, sustain, improve our use of space to support military operations. There is no one military operation that will not rely as well on space assets, including to provide sufficient strategic intelligence. Secondly, obviously we need to increase our ability to monitor what is happening in the space environment and therefore to detect and attribute actions, and we know that attribution is always difficult. Thirdly, we need to equip ourselves by 2030 with an active or auto-defense capability to discourage aggression and, if necessary, be able to defend our space interests in full accordance, of course, with international law. So to fulfill this renewed ambition, we decided to create a large space command. I know a number of our countries in Europe are looking into similar options, and it will be interesting to get that feedback as well. Lastly, our strategy, of course, cannot be unilateral, but must go hand in hand with in-depth dialogue with all our partners. France's ambition is to consolidate and, of course, deepen that cooperation, primarily with European partners, and EI2 represents a genuine perfect framework to intensify that conversation. We will have ahead of us a number of opportunities to feed the strategic thinking of our alliances, of the EU, with that perception of what the air power, the air and space power can provide to our defense strategies, namely the EU strategic compass that we will, of course, have to finalize through the EU presidency, and, of course, the revision of the NATO strategic concept. So those are the key elements I wanted to share with you, and of course I'm very much looking forward to the inputs of my fellow colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very wide tour d'horizon. And I will now give the floor to maybe to Mr. Angus Lapsley, who is a Director for Defense, International Security for the Foreign Commonwealth Office. And I will ask him maybe to give us his views on the this high-intensity resurgence, and maybe more largely his views on this necessity to get better in air and space forces. Please, sir, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Xavier, and bonjour, and hello to everybody. I should explain, by the way, I'm from the Ministry of Defence, not the Foreign Office, at least in this current job. So, look, first of all, I agree very strongly with the way you introduced this discussion and the way that Alice has just set it up as well. I think all of the analysis that we did in our strategic review that was published earlier this year underlined that risk of state versus state conflict, and therefore of higher intensity warfare, is back, and it's back in a way that we haven't really seen since the end of the Cold War. And readapting to that reality is a really important part of what we're trying to achieve in UK defence at the moment. So to sort of answer your specific question, what do we do about that? And Alice has, I think, rightly touched on a lot of the answers. I would say a couple of things, and then I want to say something about the broader challenge. So, I mean, the first thing is we have to invest in this sector. And there, I think, the signs are kind of moderately encouraging at the moment. So a number of European countries, including the UK and France, are increasing defence spending at the moment, and increasing investment in air and space capabilities is quite a big part of that. So a number of us have very capable fourth generation systems like Eurofighter or Rafale. Those systems need to continue to be modernized. They'll be in service for at least another 20 years in many cases. Then we have countries with fifth generation capability. And then we have a number of European countries developing sixth generation capability, both the UK, Sweden, Italy project and the France, Germany, Sweden, Spain project. So I think the first point is we have to sustain that investment, and there has to be a long-term political, financial, and industrial effort there. Secondly, I think we need, and Alice has alluded to this, we need to be planning carefully as an alliance and as coalitions. And I think that is a mixture of planning our capabilities together and making sure they are interoperable, but also thinking strategically about our posture and how we are using those capabilities. And I think the way that NATO, through the DDA, the concept for the defence and deterrence of the Euro-Atlantic area, is asking and challenging allies again to actually think about how we use our forces day to day to maintain deterrence and to prevent the kind of strategic intimidation that Alice was talking about. I think that's really important. So planning capabilities, but also planning how we do day-to-day operations. Then I think there's a big set of issues around investment in resilience. So we all know that air, like indeed other sectors, is very vulnerable to disruption through cyberspace or through space. And so investing in the resilience of our cyber and our space-based or space-using infrastructure, I think is critical, and they are quite big chunks of the investment that we're putting in over the next 5 to 10 years. I think there's also there's a big issue we have identified around what we call multi-domain integration. So that's basically thinking about how we use all 5 domains in a completely integrated way, using in particular the potential that the huge increase in data that we get from platforms these days, how that data can be properly curated and integrated so that a platform in any of the 5 domains can use that data effectively. And that is sometimes the answer to some of the most difficult problems. For example, part of the answer to A2AD bubbles is smart action in either cyberspace or space or indeed on land. Or amphibiosity, maybe another part of it. So you have to, I think, not assume that every domain has an answer to every domain's problem in that domain. You have to look beyond that. I think the last thing I would say about the high intensity piece is, we shouldn't forget the role that aircraft carriers can play in this. And of course, the UK and France now have very capable aircraft carriers. Yours is nuclear, ours is 5th generation. We also have countries like Italy bringing very capable ships into service. And I think the flexibility that being able to project air power from aircraft carriers provides you, being able to move around, move your bases around, reduce their vulnerability, and also the very high level of protection that you can provide to a carrier strike group. I think that becomes actually an increasingly important part of the picture, including here in the Euro-Atlantic space. I think, though, the second point I just wanted to make before I hand over to colleagues is that so the high intensity challenge that we face is one end of the spectrum, but I think we have to recognize that we face an increasing challenge across the spectrum. And by what I mean by that is that the kind of state-based rivals, potential adversaries that Alice was talking about, particular Russia for us as Europeans, but also perhaps increasingly China, they're not just going to think about challenging us in a high-intensity fight. They're also going to think about challenging us much more persistently on a day-to-day basis, without actually crossing the threshold of an open conflict. And I think we have to think, therefore, about how we respond to that. So I'm also a rugby fan, a rugbyman, as you might say in French. And one of the most famous quotes in British rugby is "Get your retaliation in first," which was apparently the team motivating motto of a famous team back in the 1970s. And whilst we don't want to be escalatory and we don't want to look as though we're promoting or provoking conflict, I think there is definitely something that we can do, including in the air and space domains, to make sure that we set the environment so that our adversaries don't mistake our posture as weakness and don't feel as though they have the space to own that space or to intimidate us. Now, what does that mean in practice? So I think it means the kind of things we're already doing in the alliance at the moment, for example, air policing on Europe's eastern and southern frontiers. I think that's become an extremely important and welcome development, as important in many ways as the EFP battle groups. It means building the capacity of those countries that are sort of most on the front line, if you like, and are perhaps most vulnerable to strategic intimidation. And I think that means quite regularly projecting our own air forces forward to operate with those countries. And it's something that both Britain and France do quite regularly, including projecting air power into the Indo-Pacific region. And it's something France does a lot. We do as well through the Five Powers defense agreement with Malaysia and Singapore and others. And I think that focus on being persistently present and working with partners to demonstrate to potential adversaries that actually, not only are we an alliance here in Europe, but many of us have close relationships more globally and are prepared to lean into those relationships and strengthen partners, I think is a really important part of it. I think the last thing I would say, and Elise touched on this a bit towards the end when talking about space, is I think we do have to engage in and promote a global debate about some of the behaviors we're seeing, in particular at the moment in space and in cyberspace, two domains where the conventional norms of behavior are arguably less well established and less well understood. But we see countries essentially trying to push the boundaries of what they can get away with in space and in cyberspace. And I think, just as air forces have known for a very long time what they could do, what they couldn't do, what was acceptable behavior, what wasn't acceptable behavior, we need to work as Europeans, but also with the like-minded countries like the US and Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea, and establish certain rules of the road and norms in space, and call out when we see those norms being eroded or challenged. I think that's a really, really important part of how we handle this. So I think in summary, yes, there is a lot for us as Europeans to do to invest in strengthening our capabilities to deal with challenges in air and space. It doesn't necessarily always mean increasing numbers of fighter jets. I mean, I think we will see, increasing use of what we call loyal wingmen, so UAVs that operate alongside fighter jets. And of course, the capability of today's fighter jets way exceeds even those of 20 years ago. And so sometimes absolute numbers isn't quite the issue, but increasing our combat air mass through a variety of means, I think, is right, and I agree with Elise on that. And then also just bearing in mind that this contested high-intensity fight will sit in a spectrum of competition with our rivals, and we need to think about that whole spectrum, not just the high end. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very, very rich intervention and addressing many different issues and very complementary. And so I think we will go back to some issues during our discussion. I will now maybe pass the floor to Mr. Kusela, who is Deputy Director General for Defense Policy of the Ministry of Defense in Finland. And maybe I might be interested in also listening to you, maybe evoking the need for Europe to defend against a possible military operation, and what could be expected from cooperative efforts in this respect, and what should be how could we promote the role of an evolving air and space capability, I mean collective capability in the current context we're facing all European in our immediate environment. But you have the floor, and I thank you for your intervention now.
Thank you very much, and it was very good to hear the wise words from Alice Guiton and Angus Lapsley, and I will now carry on briefly from a Finnish point of view and try to address those questions you just stated. The great power competition reflects to Finland in many ways, as our country is located along the border between Russia and the European Union. And the security in Northern Europe is increasingly interlinked, and any shifts in the security situation in the Baltic Sea region, the Arctic neighborhood of Finland, and on the North Atlantic are very closely connected. And at the same time, the Finnish Air Force is going through a significant period as we seek to gain the next generation air warfare capability with the ongoing fighter replacement program. Finland's strategic location is somewhat challenging, but from an air power perspective, also our operating environment is quite unique. We have a long country with a vast AOR and long border with Russia in the east. And Russia keeps on commissioning significant amounts of sophisticated weapon systems. On the other hand, if we look to other directions, we are bordering with our close neighbors, Sweden and Norway, and our Air Force's tasks are also closely linked to NATO's air policing mission in the Baltic states. Finland is also operating its air power in harsh climate conditions and with some other specific environment-related features. And our Air Force Chief of Plans will attend this afternoon the third roundtable, and he will cover more in detail how Finland operates its air forces, especially from an air power integration perspective. But the equation I just described requires that Finland keeps investing in maintaining our air power in both quality and quantity. And this is why our current government coalition of 5 parties has given clear guidance to replace fully our current F-18 Hornet capability with a new multi-role fighter. And the decision between the 5 tenders will be made by the end of this year, and it will be a 10 billion euro decision. And it goes without saying that this will be a significant investment to the Finnish defense and maintaining our air power. And as Defense Policy Director, I see this, of course, also as an investment to European air power. And air power is indeed a necessary part of our deterrence and defense, and it's a very important field of international cooperation. And our Air Forces exercise constantly with our European and US and Canadian partners. One of the most important Air Force exercises is the Arctic Challenge, which is conducted every second year since 2013. Arctic Challenge is organized by Finnish, Swedish and Norwegian Air Forces with rotating lead nation. And the exercise is conducted across Europe's largest training area above northern Norway, Finland and Sweden. This year Norway was the lead nation, and alongside the host nations units we had flight detachments from the Netherlands, from the UK, Germany, Denmark and the USA, as well as NATO AWACS aircraft. And these are significant exercises, but only one part of the Nordic cooperation between Finland, Norway and Sweden in the north. Our nation's air forces organize combined cross-border training air combat missions operated from their northern home bases on almost a weekly basis. To end with just a couple of words about space, which is of course rapidly growing issue on our defense agenda as a defense domain, and I would like to salute France and other European partners for taking the leadership and effort to approach this challenging domain. And luckily in Europe we have indeed countries with major expertise and capability in this area, but I also sense that this is something no European nation can tackle completely alone, so we need to work together. Finland can focus on certain necessities, for example, space situational awareness, but we also have some other state-of-the-art niche capabilities and expertise, which I hope make us an interesting partner for space control. I'll leave my intervention here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and also for this complete overview and possible contribution also in Finland, and especially in the space domain. I was very interested to listen to you. I will now maybe pass the word to General Fernando José López del Pozo, who is heading the Operations Command in the Ministry of Defense in Spain. And I wanted also to have his views on, we mentioned the notions of interoperability and connectivity in all this, for improving this synchronization and coordination at all levels. So I wanted to hear from you on this perspective, and of course on a larger perspective you may have on those issues. Please, General, you have the floor.
Hello and good morning from Madrid. First of all, let me express on behalf of Ms. Elena Gomez, the Spanish Director General for Defense Policy, our gratitude to France for inviting us to participate as panelists to this event. Well, I understand that we are here today because a global trend resulting in the integration of space as a warfighting domain comparable to land, sea, and air is emerging, and is emerging powerfully. Space increasingly appears as a field of political and technological rivalry that could become an arena of conflict. The belief that the next major conflict will either begin in or extend to space has become widespread, and we discover almost every day new threats space-related in one way or another. Facing the multiplicity of such new threats, we cannot rely solely on technical countermeasures, but we need to include the elaboration of various strategies of deterrence and establishment of political alliance. Europe at large needs to position itself in this environment and to ensure the security of its current and future space assets. This effort should be carried out not only at a national level, but also at a regional one, and also taking advantage of the opportunities provided by international organizations such as NATO or the European Union. Quoting the European Union's High Representative, Josep Borrell, it is nowadays safe to say that from a geopolitical point of view, there can be no strategic autonomy on Earth without strategic autonomy in space. Strategic autonomy and freedom of decision require situational awareness autonomy. This necessity underpins the importance of space and geospatial intelligent products, which have become an essential asset in any decision-making process. Spain, as host nation for the European Union Satellite Center, is well aware of this fact, and this is the reason why it has hosted a specific webinar on geospatial intelligence during the strategic dialogue of the European Union's future strategic compass. I'm going to comment some of the most interesting conclusions drawn up from this webinar. Space, as has been already said, is increasingly congested, contested, and competitive, subject to unilateral appropriation attempts and conflictual behavior. Reflecting growing geopolitical tension, all major space powers have modified their military doctrines related to space. They have adopted more assertive postures, in order to improve and exhibit their readiness to act in space and through space, and have emphasized the importance of deterrence as a strategy to face their potential adversaries. Any response to geopolitical rivalry, military threats, crisis management, climate change, failed states, or critical supplies requires robust space imaging, surveillance, tracking, communication, positioning, and navigation capacities. Under a risk analysis perspective, the next 5 to 10 years will see an evolution of already existing space-based threats and challenges as new space powers like China or India, but also Russia, will increasingly use space to consolidate the military power. Due to the more assertive postures, the threats and space are becoming increasingly vivid in the current period. Even if defense of space takes shape through several kinds of actions, they all rely on space situational awareness, which is in turn based on space surveillance. Space surveillance serves thus both space for defense and defense of space purposes. Indeed, by detecting and or tracking objects in orbit, surveillance enables space systems to avoid the space-based dangers and to pursue their mission to support troops on the ground. In this vein, space surveillance is crucial for the success of defense of space missions and forms the basis of military space operations. It is clear that it has become urgent to fully integrate in a coordinated way space into our common security and defense processes, giving rise of the space-related issues to the highest political level. However, the spatial domain awareness has not yet been sufficiently embedded into most crisis management exercises. Still, more could be done to promote fully fledged multinational space exercises. I'm happy to hear here Mr. Kusela speaking of space-related exercise, because I think this is a key point of our progress. We cannot afford to be unprepared to counter the weaponization, congestion, and disruption of space. This inevitably raises the question of the posture to be adopted by European countries in these matters. Should we define it as a joint position of all member states, or should we rather look for the conjunction of national individual stances? Spain believes that a cooperative approach seems the most appropriate to tackle the challenges associated with space security, given the shared interest at stake and the potential leverage of a coordinated and cooperative approach. We are aware that achieving consensus on the vision and management of space defense-related issues remains highly ambitious. When reacting to international developments, it cannot be highlighted enough that European effort needs to be consistent and coordinated, as mentioned before. To that end, we should identify the issues to be tackled to streamline collaboration on sensitive matters at bilateral, multilateral, or supranational levels, while acknowledging the role of other organizations, as for example, NATO. Space surveillance could give us a common ground to kick off the integrated approach. We must say that even if traditionally countries have been notoriously divided on space, right now we need political ambition and focus on interoperability and supranational cooperation with like-minded nations to respond to the challenges ahead in the space sector. I'm sure that the debate that we are having in the framework of this European Intervention Initiative event will help us in finding a common ground to develop a shared space and defense strategic culture that could ease a stronger cooperation among our countries in the spatial domain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General, for this focused intervention and highlighting the importance of space as an element of our air and space posture. Again, I think we will be able to discuss with maybe questions that will come also from the audience, by the way. I will now pass the floor to Mrs. Lorian Sekvis, who is Deputy Director International Affairs and Operation of the Ministry of Defense in the Netherlands. And I would like also, of course, having your views on this importance of air and space forces and coordination for Europe, and seen from your perspective in the Netherlands. So please, Mrs. Sekvis, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you very much for convening this conference on this very important topic. Thank you very much to all the previous speakers for your introductions, and thank you also to Alice, also on behalf of Lars Walraven, our director, who could not be here today. But he has given me a few thoughts to share with you, so I would like to delve straight in. For the Netherlands, international cooperation is at the very core of all of our policies, including those regarding air power and space control. Our air chief will focus on the elements of air power and air power integration further on in the conference, so I'll leave this definitely to him. He's an absolute expert on this. Cooperation is crucial, has been mentioned by quite a few speakers already, and we have many successful examples. The MRTT project comes to mind, for example, Baltic air policing, the further development and rollout of our F-35 program. And also mentioned by many colleagues is investment. It's absolutely key. And at the moment, our Dutch Ministry of Defense is focusing very heavily on research and development, and we're hoping to translate all of this into actual technological innovation. And one of the things that I would like to share with you today from a policy perspective is the fact that we are currently in the process of drafting a Dutch defense space agenda to help define our ambitions in this field. And it is a document that is still in development, and we're hoping that once our new government is formed, it will be finalized and published. These things traditionally take quite a bit of time, the forming of government, I must add, in the Netherlands. So hopefully we will make some progress on this fairly soon. But for this occasion, I would like to take the opportunity to walk you through some of the focal points of this agenda. Hopefully it will be of interest to the audience. So the agenda will consider developments, threats, and dependence in and on space. And the interest and goals that we have towards 2035, which is the horizon, our planning horizon in our current defense vision, we're also going to discuss how we move towards certain goals in that direction. And really, space situational awareness is at the very core of our agenda. And so in general, and this has also been mentioned by quite a few colleagues, it is very necessary to look at the manner in which the space domains enables interoperability. The Netherlands has specific interest in the development of more small satellites and sensors. We are also very keen on looking into space as a way of developing our early warning capability. Having sensors to identify threats in an early stage is very important for many of the developments that have also been mentioned this morning. Now, and these sensors give us the opportunity to analyze and to monitor space weather and other challenges that may impact military communication and interoperability. Sensors may also play a role in warning us against threats, such as ballistic missiles or hypersonic weapons or anti-satellites, as mentioned by Alice as well. The other thing that we're looking towards space for, obviously, is also navigation, playing a big part in the military domain. And so looking at the positioning, timing, and navigation from a space perspective research and development will eventually allow us to develop alternatives to the current GPS system. And by doing so, we think we will increase strategic autonomy, and it forms an opportunity to support European civilian and defense space industry. The above-mentioned goals and developments will contribute to our information-driven operations, which is something that is very important in the new Dutch defense vision strategy. In order to make this run smoothly, we will further establish our Defense Space Security Center. And I would like to close off really by saying that as on all other strategic topics, and so many have been mentioned this morning already, international cooperation is absolutely the key to success. As the Netherlands is a member of quite a lot of different organizations that are looking into this topic, NATO has been mentioned, EU has been mentioned, Alice mentioned several PESCO projects in this domain, obviously the European Intervention Initiative, but all of the other groups that are currently also looking into this domain. We also want to stress the importance of making sure that we bilaterally but also multilaterally coordinate all of the different exchanges in the different platforms to make sure that we really have the ability to amplify our message when it comes to this important domain. So I would like to leave it at that, and thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sikiewicz. It was also very very much interesting to hear about the plans of the Netherlands regarding space. And I will now, we have unfortunately very few remaining time, and we must stick to a strict schedule, but and we will now have so I'm not sure we'll have a lot of questions, but I'm sure these initial debates will help foster discussions afterwards. And I will now give the floor to Mrs. Excuse me, I just need to get my stuff in order here. To Mrs. Victoria Malmer, who is Deputy Head of Department at the Department for Security Policy and International Relations at the Swedish Ministry of Defense. Please, Mrs. Malmer, you have the floor for telling us your views also from the perspective of Sweden about this importance of air and space forces and the importance of collective endeavors in this domain. Please, you have the floor.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, and thank you so much for the opportunity to take part in this event and to provide some perspectives from a Swedish point of view on behalf of our policy director, Mr. Lagerlöf. Also very happy to be part of the so-called air crew of the EI2, as was mentioned in the French introduction. My starting point would be the fact that the security situation in Europe has deteriorated over time, and this has been mentioned by many of the people who have already taken the floor. One can only take a look at the map of Northern Europe and easily understand the complexity of the geography and the strategic military setting. A few words on the threats that we might face. Distances, and therefore also time for warning, are short. Land, sea, air, space, and cyber, all these domains matter, and also, as was mentioned by a previous speaker, how they interact together. The air domain is, of course, of great importance, as an attack may begin with an initial strike on base areas, command nodes, and other critical civilian and military infrastructure. An initial strike could be carried out with cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, attack aircraft, and network attacks, as well as through sabotage and the liquidation of key personnel. In direct connection with an initial strike, important areas could be occupied for the development of long-range weapon system. Initial phases of conflict might also involve malign space operations, attempts to manipulate, disrupt, or destroy vital space-based assets on which we rely on for communication, navigation, and surveillance. These risks that cyber attack, offensive space-based attacks, or attacks against ground infrastructure are used is growing. So I think from this fairly harsh reality, the Swedish government bill, the Total Defense Bill, was decided in the Swedish Parliament in December last year. The decision represents the largest increase in defense spending in 70 years, and many of you have already mentioned the importance of investment on this area. The Air Force in Sweden will be supplied with more missiles, including long-range ones. Radar systems will be replaced, improved capability to base air combat forces on dispersed air bases, and modern portable air defense for the Armée. And I would like to highlight 3 important components in building a strong and robust Swedish air defense for the future. Firstly, the swing-roll fighter aircraft Gripen E-Series has a new and more powerful engine, improved range performance, and the ability to carry greater payloads. It also has a new AESA radar, infrared search and track system, highly advanced electronic warfare, and communication system, together with superior situational awareness. Furthermore, Gripen is equipped with the MBDA Meteor missile for combat beyond visual range. Secondly, the medium-range air defense system Patriot, adding vital capabilities to the Swedish air defense suite. It's both what we need to meet future enemy threats from above and means to give our swing-roll fighter aircraft freedom of maneuver for other tasks than air defense. Thirdly, the Visby-class corvette will be upgraded, including the integration of air defense missiles. The system will expand our multifaceted air defense system further away from our shores, thus contributing to operational depth. As for space, focus on strategic and operational understanding of the roles space assets and the defense of them will have in future conflict. We're building a strategic and legal framework for a robust future space policy. A national Swedish space strategy has been published, and the first steps to build space launch capability at the S-Range Space Center are taken in building a European asset. Finally, and importantly, we do not operate in a vacuum, and as has been a theme of this conference, cooperation with partners is essential in the air and space domain. The European Intervention Initiative is an important platform for exchange of views and building a common understanding of these domains. We also must build strength and durability not only now, but into the future. Therefore, Sweden entered into a memorandum of understanding with the United Kingdom a couple of years ago, the Future Combat Air System Cooperation, to explore possibilities for meeting future operational requirements through cost-effective development. And in 2020, Italy joined this partnership. And I also wanted to underline, finally, what Finland said about the importance of the ACE exercise that we just finalized. This is a very concrete example on how we train together and take on some of the challenges that have been discussed here today. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this concluding intervention and very rich also the contribution to our discussion. Unfortunately, as I told you, we must stick to a very strict schedule, and the matter is very rich. So we unfortunately don't have the time to take questions from the audience. I will just quickly conclude, but you've touched upon so many different and very, very logical, coherent aspects. I retain the importance to sustain and even increase investment in air and space capabilities. That's, I mean, the underlying element of all your interventions. The importance of planning capabilities also in the context of alliance and coalitions, but also consider the wide scope of intervention. High intensity is a key element, of course. We also have to establish partnerships, and we have to consider different military situations that we could be faced with. And of course also, and I take this as a particularly interesting in my perspective, and the importance in all your intervention of space that's been devoted by your countries and other nations under this European Investment Intervention Initiative. The importance of space and the fact that space in all these discussions seems to be much even more integrated as an element of air and space, genuine air and space gathering. And I think that's very important, and I think from an observer point of view, very encouraging. So I want to thank you very much, each of you directors, for this very rich interventions. I will now ask for a round of applause, maybe, from the audience. And thank you very much, and I will now give back the floor to our organizer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pasco. Thank you all for your insights, very rich, as you underlined, and we could have spent hours listening to your insights. We will pause for a while and start Roundtable 2 on time at 11:20. For those online, we will have some videos for you, and for those in the room, please, you can take a break, grab a coffee, and be back in your seats for 11:20. Thank you very much.
It's a profession that starts with an A. A is for airplane, A is for aerial, and A is for aeronautics. But also, A is for Clément Ader, for aviators, for all those who, over the past 150 years, have turned the dream of flight into a reality. A is also for achievement. Today, the aeronautics sector employs 194,000 people in France, a strong economic force focused on international horizons. An industry built on knowledge and expertise from both large established corporations and small innovative companies working hand in hand. And so, A is for ambition, because tomorrow, even more so than today, humans are opening up to the world, moving and coming closer to one another, and airplanes will carry them there. On air with an I. I is for Icarus, of course. I is for intelligence, and I is for innovation. Because innovative advances in research and development are at the basic foundations of the French aviation and aerospace industry. Because for over 50 years, the biggest successes in the sector are a result of innovation. Every year, the French aeronautic industry files several thousand patents and invests over 1 billion euros in production equipment. And finally, on air with an R. R is for responsibility, because French aeronautic companies are fully aware of their social and environmental responsibilities. This is why the industry pays careful attention to security and safety. This is why it invests in new territories, where it supports high-tech industry and develops skill sets that are essential to its future. This is why it launches programs that will help reduce even more the impact of air travel on the environment, protecting resources and creating an aeronautic industry that respects our planet and the people who live on it.
Second roundtable. While they are finding the seats, allow me to welcome Mrs. Muriel de la Porte-Laird, who will moderate this roundtable too. Mrs. de la Porte-Laird is a defense analyst involved with governments and think tanks, both in France and in the US. Ma'am, you are a graduate of schools many young students aspire to join, namely Sciences Po Paris, the Sorbonne, and Georgetown University. Each of them suffice alone to strengthen a resume. You published several books and articles in French and in English, mostly on defense and strategic issues. After recently published your last book on the return of direct defense in Europe, meeting the challenge of 21st century authoritarian power, you are now working on another publication about air and space maintenance. You founded in 2009 a defense and security magazine and a website, Christian Operational SLDS, that you continue to develop as its editor-in-chief. Finally, allow me to highlight that you are no stranger to the military, as you experienced it firsthand, having completed your military service in the French Army. Ma'am, we are thankful you accepted to moderate Roundtable 2 on cooperation and capability development. You will host military, procurement agency, and industry leaders that you will personally introduce. Thank you for your presence. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Colonel, for this very kind introduction. First of all, it's an enormous honor to be the moderator for this very prestigious panel. And since the theme of this first E12 Air and Space Power Conference is synchronizing strategic and operational tempos, I'll start this introduction with one observation, comparing the military world and the industrial one. Both have something in common. They are facing an acceleration of time, a contrast with the COVID period we just spent. For the aviators, it is the acceleration of the famous OODA loop, Orient, Observe, Decide, Act. That's to say the decision-making process in the cockpit. And for the industries, it's the production processes which are currently accelerated. The reason is, of course, the revolution in new technologies that we are all experiencing today, which have led to the new warfighting concept that were touched upon this morning already, such as collaborative combat in the armed forces, as well as a new collaborative approach in industrial cooperation, and that's what we're going to talk today. And this gathering of this exceptional panel is actually a reflection of the current rebirth, a renaissance, if we could call it that way, of what's happening in our field with the future combat air systems are the symbols. One of the many challenges is to reconcile or synchronize 3 different calendars and agendas with their own constraints and logics. That's to say the political ones, the economic ones, and the military ones, where the political one gives a political impetus, the economic one through the industrial and a strong industrial base, defense base, can actually help the military to protect all of us, the democracy and the values we all care about. So the stakes are very high, as the goal is to help our air and space armed forces to fight together as smoothly as possible, which means with the best interoperability possible. That's really the key word of this panel, against growing and changing threats ranging from hybrid to high-intensity conflicts, as we saw this morning. So the spirit of Europe's founding fathers, such as Monet or Adenauer, have led to incredible successes in European military aerospace cooperation in the 60s. And you can actually see this when you go in this museum in the Cocards Hall, where you have an incredible development of multiple prototypes. So we might be entering a very similar period, and to talk about this fascinating transformation, we have 5 panelists, which I shall briefly introduce, and then we'll have 10 minutes of questions, Q&A both from the audience and from the internet. So every speaker has 9 minutes to present. So we'll start with Lieutenant General Frédéric Parisot, who is currently the Vice Chief of the French Air and Space Force since last March. Before then, like most high-level military officers, he had multiple careers. First, as a pilot, he commanded in particular the 1-5 Vendée Fighter Squadron at the Orange Air Force Base in 2001. Also as a graduate from multiple war colleges, in particular the Joint War College and the Higher Military Studies Center. Also as a fighter, he has been accumulating 3,000 flight hours and 81 war missions. Also as a coalition player, he was in particular the very first exchange and liaison officer within the Pentagon in 2008. And also as a military planner in 2018, he was Deputy Chief of the Chief of Staff of the French Air and Space Force and in charge of preparing the future. And preparing the future for the French Air and Space Force is indeed the focus of General Parisot's presentation today. He will in particular provide answers to these 4 key points. What is air and space power for European countries? What are the challenges ahead? Collaborative air combat, massive data processing, how to face huge potential combat losses, and so on. Third question would be, where are we as far as European cooperation is concerned? And you'll see that it's already well started. And what should we do together? Our second panelist will be Dirk Hocker, who is currently the Chief Executive Officer of Airbus Defence and Space since 2016. He holds a degree in mechanical engineering from the Technical University of Brunswick in Germany. He started his professional career as an R&D engineer for process and software analysis in the automotive industry at Renault in Paris. In 1996, he entered Siemens, where he had a long career. And in 2011, he became the division CEO of Industrial Solutions, including the digital platform business. So his career has been spanning more than 25 years and 5 continents in various industries, but there is a recurring theme, which is digitalization. So it's no surprise that he's going to talk to us about the future of air power through a technological lens, explaining why European cooperation is part of Airbus DNA, with a special focus on first the new technological cycles, AI, laser, robotics, and so on, and secondly, the future dynamics of digital transformation, demonstrating the impact of very structuring programs such as FCAS and the combat cloud on the civilian sector. He actually touched upon a very interesting new dynamic, which is the fact that there is new cross-fertilization where the military, between the civilian and military sector, where the military seems to be taking the lead again, which is actually good news. And then the third speaker is Éric Béranger, who is currently the CEO of MBDA since 2019. He's a graduate engineer from the École Polytechnique and Télécom Paris. He started his career in 1988, where he has been holding various management positions in engineering operations, finance, at France Télécom, Société Générale, and Matra Marconi Space. In 2003, he created Astrium Services. In 2012, he became CEO of Astrium Satellites. And prior to joining MBDA, Éric Béranger was the CEO of OneWeb. Because MBDA has been succeeding for decades to make it work, to make European cooperation also part of the MBDA DNA, with 5 different countries involved, they are all part of the E2I. Éric Béranger is going to give us a few recipes about the way industry can actually be a true bridge builder among nations. For him, just for a few introductory points, the European Intervention Initiative is exactly the right model to follow, very pragmatic. The industries should not be just the suppliers for the armed forces, but build true win-win partnerships from the outset, so you can actually jointly assess threats and specs together. And then the industry can help countries specialize and excel, and therefore allow a very long-lasting cooperation spirit. Our fourth speaker is Éric Trappier, who was introduced this morning. I will just highlight a very few points. Currently Chief Executive Officer of Dassault Aviation since 2013, the youngest one of all, at age 52 when he started this position. He served in the Navy during his conscription and graduated from the National Institute of Telecommunications in Paris. In 1984, he started his career at Dassault. In 2001, he was already director of military export. 2006, he was international general director. And as you saw this morning, he's also the head of GIFAS and many other things. So his guidelines for today's talk are going to be first answering two questions: how to best match operational requirements, and secondly, who manage the projects, how is it done? He's going to raise the issues of industrial contracting, work share, which is a major one, and industrial return, operational support and sustainability, the rules of game concerning export, and in conclusions, he will touch on the operational industrial performances conditions, and the need, more to the point, to align R&T and R&D budgets with stated ambitions. Finally, as a closure of this panel, we have Thierry Carlier, who is currently the director of the International Directorate of the DGA, which is a French procurement agency. He has this position since 2018. He has been graduated as an aeronautic and space engineer from Centrale in 1990 in Paris. He served in the Navy during his conscription and then joined DGA. In 2000, he was head of procurement policy at the same office. And then in 2013, he became deputy director for bilateral and multilateral cooperation and for European development. In 2014, he was at the Prime Minister General Secretariat for Defense and Security as the Deputy Director for International Strategic and Technological Affairs. He's going to talk about trying to answer the question, what needs to be done to cooperate with efficiency? He will first describe why arms cooperation is absolutely necessary, and especially in defense aerospace. And finally, he will highlight the opportunities European initiatives, such as the European Defence Fund, can provide. So that's it for me. General, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Air Chiefs, Air Chief Representative, Directors, Industry Leaders, and General Officers. Thank you for coming today at this conference, and it's a great honor to open the second panel, which obviously I will approach the topic from an operational point of view. Already mentioned in the previous panel, we need to ask ourselves, what is airspace power for European countries? And obviously it starts with defining which air and space missions can achieve or participate to. For France, air and space power enables political will by first preserving situational awareness. Situational awareness is mandatory for decision makers and information superiority. Air and space powers ensure freedom of action, already talked about that, for European armed forces. Air and space superiority are still mandatory to lower the risk for ground operation, and it started 30 years ago by Operation Desert Storm in 1991. Obviously, air and space power provides support, force projection, logistics to European armed forces, and at the end of the day, if you want to go far and fast, you need aircraft. Maybe one day we're going to get rockets, but so far it's airplanes. Air power is absolutely compliant with the three principles of war edicted by Maréchal Foch before World War I, which are freedom of action, economy of force, and concentration of efforts. So for France, air and space power plays and will continue to play a critical role on a large array of operations, from prevention to crisis response, to intervention up to high-intensity operations. When others realized that they left this area, actually our Air Force didn't. Thanks to the nuclear mission that we have and the strategic air forces, it was highlighted that we have this mission, and we need to go through any defense, whatsoever, when the president decides that we have to strike. And this is based on Rafale and the missile that is carrying. Rafale will continue to evolve. We have F4 in the pipe. We're starting to think about F5. Will carry the new hypersonic missile ASN-4G. And then, because we're going to have Rafale until 2065-ish, then we're going to have F6, F7. So Rafale will be the workhorse for us. Aerospace power will also play a critical role in protecting the European territory against new generation threats. High supersonic missiles, swarming drones, hybrid warfare with greater competition in airspace and cyber domains. But I think we can realize that collectively we do a pretty good job thanks to the multi and bilateral cooperation as well as the NATO standardization and SOPs. But we still have a few challenges ahead of us. The first one are the new threats, especially hypersonic missiles, where our potential adversaries are very active. We don't have yet the means to protect against that. The second domain was already mentioned is multi-domain combat networks, including for us collaborative air combat. It includes C2. We talked a lot about platforms, but C2 is essential to make sure that we have control of what's going on in the air. Sensors, aircraft being unmanned or manned, and everything needs to be on the same network. So we need industry and us to work on the common standards and open architecture for connectivity. This is essential, I think, for us. It is a sovereignty issue for Europe. And we should not take the next L16 just as the only standard for the Europeans. The third point is massive data processing in near real time through IA that will be put into our C2, and all this into a combat cloud. And the point is that we shall not wait for the SCAF to do that or on GWS. We need to start earlier with the current platforms that we have. The fourth point is man-machine teaming. Already touched about that. The remote carrier issue that need to be again tried before NGWS or SCAF. Fifth, we need a European industrial cooperation to share development costs, and obviously no country now can by itself develop such programs like the NGWS. And finally, already touched by the chief, is combat losses. We will use again attrition, as a word in our vocabulary. So we need mass. We need more airplanes. We need more weapons, more crews, and remote carriers as well to create the mass when we need to. But obviously, we think as an Air Force that there is a large place for cooperation. Cooperation is not new. We did it for the C-160 Transall, for the Alpha Jet, and we have new cooperation in place, or some are actually on the way. Fighters, NGWS, I think we're close to a conclusion, initial conclusion, and we really trust that all the governments will go for it. Enablers, Euromail, A400, MRTT are a great success, and we think that that's a good area for more cooperation. Ballistic missile defense, we have a CSP project called Twister, and that's something that is already at the EU level. We already mentioned connectivity. Multi-domain is essential. We talked about CSP project EcoWar. We have as well the program, the ACCS program, that is very important for us. It's obviously a difficult program, but I think we're out of the clouds now, and we're looking forward for the ACCS first operational capability. We have also the Defense European Fund for the collaborative air combat program that will ensure interoperability between the FCAS world and eventually the Tempest world when it shows up. Other potential areas for cooperation seen from a military point of view, we are putting on the table in these days a major project for us, a CSP project. It's called the Future Medium Tactical Cargo, which is capitalizing on the A400 experience and development. And for us, the aim is to replace the C-130 in our inventory. So it's called FMTC. So for the ones who are interested, you can see me after. Defensive space is another program. It's about passive defense to protect critical satellites and space military mission training. Other areas that are not covered yet is our offensive electronic warfare, SEAD, we talked about that, and counter-drone warfare, which seems to me a very good things to work with allies, because we all face the same issue. The industry is very dynamic on that, and we need to make sure that we work together to have an efficient solution. So to conclude, I'll use a quote from a former USAFE commander. So quote, "Air power is like oxygen. You don't notice it until it starts disappearing," end of quote. And I'll add space to that. So air and space powers are like oxygen. Air and space power will be vital to the joint community in the future. It will be true in all EI2 countries. We must therefore build together stronger capabilities to avoid what Marshall Montgomery said in 1954. If you lose the war in the air, you lose the war, and you lose it quickly. And I will add space and cyber to this quote. So as we said, and as we all know, no single country can take part in all capability development programs. So I commend the EI2 countries to gather their forces to commit to some of them. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good morning also from my side. Great pleasure to be here. And yeah, looking at the COVID-19 crisis, it has demonstrated how fast we can see that the supply chain becomes very critical. And I think more than ever, it has to be our ambition to strive for European strategic autonomy. But this is, of course, something that's not only ambitious, but is also very cautious. And therefore, European collaboration is the key. Here, I'm very proud and also glad to see that the collaboration evolves in many axes. Especially, we saw on the 13th of July 2017, the collaboration between France and Germany being written down in the strategic cooperation agreement by President Macron and Chancellor Merkel, demonstrating the importance of these strategic projects. This has been a good starting point for many key projects, and I think we in Europe can be proud of that we have been able to develop really competitive products in the last decades. Multi-role fighters like the Rafale and Eurofighter, despite the problem at the beginning, a very competitive transport aircraft, the A400M, the MRTT, and of course very pleased to learn that the French Air Force mission was a success with more than 39 hours of flights, a really big success story, demonstrating the capabilities in Europe. And also we see that pooling becomes more and more critical. We see that topics like the EATC in Eindhoven or the MMF, the multinational MRTT fleet, are becoming instruments in order to focus on key strategic missions, finding synergies, and concentrating on some common goals. I think that's also in the DNA of Airbus. We have 4 home nations, and so we live every day through the diversity of such culture, which is good and sometimes challenging, because we're all different, but I think that's also what makes us competitive in Europe, to use the capabilities of the nations, combine them with limited resources in certain cases, but being able to create new, very innovative, very competitive products and systems. So this has been vital, and I'm also glad to see that based on the closer collaboration, we have been able to push forward a very important European project like Armée. And here again, it was more on concentrating, keeping the key capabilities in Europe, making sure that we create sovereignty also for the decades to come, and also leading the pathways towards more ambitious projects like SCAF, FCAS, which are of course even more complicated. What is also different there, it changes the way of design and development. For the first time, we work with new digital tools, and this is also closely with our partners as Dassault and Leonardo and Eurodrone, but of course with Dassault and many other partners in FCAS. We use now, the first time, digital twins. We will reduce the time of development, working in a more agile environment in order to cope with the requirements that are constantly evolving and that we need to build in projects where we, for example, like in the FCAS, plan to go operational, fully operational in 2040. But we still need to ensure that in the 20 years to come, we incorporate the technology leapfrogging that will happen in these times. So here we need to change towards agile software and hardware development and need to integrate that into our product and system. And I think that's a total new way of developing military projects that we have never done before. So very ambitious, but I think also something that we can achieve due to the competence of the international partners. And also we have to say, a lot of people were very skeptical when we talked the first time about the next generation weapon system and the FCAS, but we have overcome also on the industrial part, on nation part, all the challenges, and keep the fingers crossed. Tomorrow is a very important date because we hopefully pass the German parliament approval in order to release the next step for the FCAS project. Here we see, beside the development of the next generation fighter, which is under the lead of Dassault, we also will build a system or system. Here we will incorporate all new technologies, be it on the hyperscaling, edge computing, artificial intelligence. This will enable us to also close some of the gaps that we have on the civilian sector today, where we lag behind on topics like cloud storage, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, especially compared to China and the US. This gives us the first time again the ability to use defense spending also to close gaps that we have on the civilian side, ensuring that European companies can be more competitive and that we can create new innovations that will be really state-of-the-art again. Just imagine, in order to create the connectivity that we will need for the future combat air system, to connect supersonic jets with a flying data center, be it on an AF400M or an MITT, with ground segment stations, with satellites, in order to be at all times able to communicate and connect voice and data in order to have the reconnaissance intelligence at any point of the planet in order to be able to operate at any given circumstances. This is something that goes far beyond the capabilities the usual, let's say, civilian technologies offer today. And this is why it's so important that we demonstrate with the demonstrator and then afterwards with the development and production program of FCAS what the European industry, in combination with the three home nations, are able to create on the way forward. And I think we have already demonstrated with manned-unmanned teaming demonstration that we are here leading in many areas, and we are definitely convinced that in the collaboration that we have created, starting with the three nations, that the European industry will do every effort to demonstrate that we will be also leading on the defense side in the decades to come.
Yes, good morning. I would like to really thank you, and particularly I would like to thank the French Air and Space Force, and in particular General Lavigne for inviting me this morning, because I see a lot of commonalities between the E2I initiative and MBDA. E2I, for me, it's indeed pragmatism, it's effectiveness, and a very, very big word, it is anticipation. Anticipation based on a shared threat assessment. And if you look at MBDA, what do we do in MBDA? We provide the military forces with the capabilities, with some of the capabilities that they need to deliver their missions with the appropriate level of operational superiority. And we do this across the full spectrum, be it counter UAVs on one side, on one end of the spectrum, to deterrence on the other side. And to do this, we need to be on top of all the technologies that we are using in all our domains. One example of the result of all of this is that with 6 of the nations which are part of the E2I initiative, we have built the Meteor missiles, which can beat any alternative, and above all, which are providing a lasting superiority. And to do this, what do? We constantly try to anticipate on the threats and to imagine solutions for those future threats that we are anticipating together with our customers. By the way, this means that MBDA is quite unique. Personally, I do not know any other company in the world which is so close to the core of sovereignty, and at the same time totally integrated between several nations. MBDA was born from the willingness of several nations to cooperate, pool, and share. If I take one example of this willingness, I would take, of course, the Lancaster House treaties, whereby the UK and France decided willingly to depend mutually on each other. And based on this, we created in MBDA 4 centers of excellence for various subsystems in our missile systems, where each nation is depending on the other. Two of those centers of excellence are located in the UK, 2 others are located in France, and each country is depending on the other. So this is a very strong cooperation and mutual dependency. But also, besides being born from this willingness, MBDA also fosters cooperation. And this is the way we saw the creation and the development of Scalp Storm Shadows, of Meteor that I just mentioned, of Sea Venom, or of CAM-ER, for instance, also between the UK and Italy. So, as such, MBDA is cementing this cooperation and the mindset of the cooperation. It fuels it in the long run, and it makes it long-lasting. I think this is also another characteristic of what industry can do for cooperation between nations. So based on those 20 years now, more than 20 years of experience of MBDA, what can we observe? I think it was mentioned by Dirk, for instance, the complexity of the threats, the way the threats are evolving, are making it absolutely necessary to build solutions which are becoming more and more technology hungry and more complex. This means that cooperation becomes more and more necessary because it's very difficult, more and more difficult for a single nation to cope with all those requirements. And then a cooperation to exist, to really live, to deliver fruits, needs programs. It has to be based on programs. But equally, programs are fostering a better understanding between the various partners, because it forces discussion, it forces to understand what everybody needs, what are the drivers, and so equally it facilitates this cooperation. This is what we have seen on all our programs where we have cooperation. I could have mentioned as well Aster, for instance, which started between Italy and France, where each nation has to really come across, really boil down to what are the key needs, its key characteristics, and at the end of the day, we can get a joint specification, which then helps to deliver a program. To deliver successful programs, I think that there are some key ingredients. The first one is visibility over the long run. As I mentioned, the solutions are getting more and more complex. Since they are getting more and more complex, you need to invest more and more on the long term. And you need also to build skills, to build competences in new domains. And for this, you need visibility. Any uncertainty on those programs is clearly an enemy. Also, to deliver successful programs, we see that governance is, of course, very important. I'm sure that we will have some people this morning talking about this. Governance, it means roles and responsibilities, who is in charge of what and who is doing what, but also making sure that the decision-making is clear and can happen. If you have several partners, you can have different opinions. At the end of the day, a decision must be taken if you want to move forward. You need to know whether you will finally go on the right or on the left. Also, it's very important to accept to use always the best athlete for each part of a program. Basically, if I want to take an image, you have the choice between an attitude which sometimes we see, which is in a cooperation trying to compensate for a certain weakness in a certain competence, and then trying to catch up, or on the contrary, using really the best athletes from each partner in order to build the best potential solution. In other words, the difference is between building a team of crippled or building a team of champions, which gives better chances to build a world champion. And the third element, the third ingredient, which I think is absolutely key for a successful program, is of course the intense dialogue. The intense dialogue to converge on a shared set of specifications. You need to put everything on the table beforehand, making sure you understand the various drivers. So, if I was to conclude, I would say that at MBDA, our experience of cooperation is that it becomes more and more the norm, it becomes more and more necessary. The role of industry in those cooperations is, of course, to deliver the capabilities, to match the requirements, but it also, de facto, it is acting as a cement. It is fueling those cooperations, it is making them long-lasting, and it is helping the various partner nations to converge by forcing this dialogue. And to make it successful, visibility, governance, and dialogue are absolutely key to success. Thank you.
Coming back to you as a CEO of Dassault Aviation, Eric gave me an idea just to introduce a little bit Dassault, because maybe some of you do not know, which has to be said in a few words. Dassault has been developing fighters and civilian aircraft for a long time, and in fact for the last 70 years continuously, with only one design office taking care of fighters as well as a civilian Falcon aircraft. And we have about 1,000 fighters flying worldwide, and we have about 2,200 Falcon flying worldwide. So it's a small company, but with a huge number of customers all around the world. It's about a turnover sales, about 90% international, 10% is domestic market with mainly the French Ministry of Defense. So it's just to show you how, in a certain way, international we are. But at the same time, we are French, and we feel French, and we are serving the interests of France. We are proud to be French. It doesn't mean we are not open to cooperation, and I'd like to mention at least two successes in cooperation. One is the AlphaJet, which has been named before, and which is the trainer of the French Air Force as well as the Patrouille de France. It was a cooperation between Germany and France, between Dornier and Dassault, and it was a success. So, and we recognize that this type of cooperation was a full success. Number two success is, because still is, Neuron, which was 6 nations together decided to go for a demonstrator, not for a program, but for a demonstrator, to demonstrate that we may develop a UCAV, which is the case, and still flying since 2012, with quite a number of flight testing. Number two is stealth capability, and capability to be back after a mission and after many flights without degrading the performance of the stealth capability, which is a challenge. And number three was also to demonstrate that we can handle a huge technological demonstration for fighters with, in cooperation with 6 nations. Coming back to the question you asked, ops requirement is very important. We have to develop fighters, 2 types of constraints. One is conventional missions, which is air superiority or air to ground, and second is nuclear capability, because France has this capability of nuclear capacity. In fact, the second one is leading really the type of systems we have been able to develop up to the Rafale in order to handle long-range missions and to survive, because you know, a fighter with a pilot inside, the first mission is to survive before even to deliver a target. And that is really something which is important, to integrate countermeasures, radar capabilities, and data link and things like that. In the conventional mission, of course, interoperability, networks are the key. Radio capability to be able to fuel with tankers and this and that. In the second mission, it's opposite in a certain way. You have to take into account that no more GPS, no more radio communication, and you need to handle the mission. I mean, it's a separate capability. Number 3, and I will go fast, is capability to operate from an aircraft carrier. It's only a matter of capability. So to answer to your question, in a cooperative program, what is going to be important is that the ops requirement is quite clear. Even if you have specificities for each country, you need to have an envelope of the constraints which are very clear, not to change after 6 months or 2 years or 5 years, because in that case, you are making complexity in the development. So it has to be seen at the beginning. Doesn't mean that we will not upgrade. For sure we will upgrade, but step by step. So it's an issue. Second, so the ops people are so important at the beginning of the program. Second is the states. It's not at the level of the European Union, it's at the level of the states. So the states have to, provided you have the political clearance or financing clearance, you need to cooperate together. But we need, I'm telling you, we need a program director. If we are 3 around the table, we don't need 3 program directors. We need 1 program director who takes the ops requirement from the 3 countries and to be able to say, this is now what we are going to do step by step, putting the money in place, putting the specification in place, and contracting with industry. At the level of industry, we need the best athletes, as Eric said. What does it mean? If you take the example of the SCAF, which is the question, the SCAF has been, the FCAS in English, sorry, has been divided in different pillars. So it's a so huge program that we have separated in a certain way the different pillars. One pillar may be, for example, the engine. So we will give a certain responsibility of prime contracting at a company, which will take the lead in order to organize the share with the other companies and the partners which is going to develop the engine accordingly. So same with the aircraft. We have been able to take the lead of the aircraft, as Dirk said, and we will take the lead. Doesn't mean we will do everything. Meaning is that we need to be the architect of this pillar and to be able to share the work in a way which will not be against performance, against budget, because we have constraints, and the prime shall take into account these constraints of budgeting and responsibility and performance. Another constraint is geo return. For sure, it shall not be a geo return which will jeopardize the performance. It has to be a geo return because the countries spend the money and want, in a certain way, the money back to their country in the way of industry. This has to be at the level of the industry, which has to deal together in order to have the right work share. And at the level of the states, it has to be only to say, we need a certain percentage, roughly. If we have the political implication in this zero return, then for sure it will be difficult to manage. And we have a clear view, and believe me, the difficulty sometimes is not between Airbus and Dassault. It may be sometime between the states themselves or with other companies. So it's, I'm glad to say that with Dirk, we decided together at the very beginning of the story, after the political commitment of 2017 mentioned by Dirk, that we decided to go ahead. And besides everything we may say, it's also a human relationship. It's also a cooperation, a matter of confidence. If you don't have the confidence, you cannot work properly. As Philippe used to say, because he likes rugby very much, you need to be the best athlete where you are, if you are in front or if you are backside. But at the same time, you need to rely on the other players. So you need to rely and to have the confidence because you know that he is the best athlete. So that is some of the keys which we need to really follow if we want a success in this cooperation. For the technology of the future, I think there are two matters. One is first simulation. We need simulation to try on simulation what should be the threats, what should be the proper answer to the threat, what should be the formulas in order to address these new threats, because the question is not the old threat, but the new threats coming, which we may be able to anticipate. So simulation is the key. Based on that types of simulations, we need also to exercise technology, because we may say this technology, that technology, there are quite a few technologies in which we are working all together in different fields. We need to check that when you put together a certain number of technology, it works. So this is why we need demonstrators. What we need, demonstration, real ones, not only simulation. Simulation is good, but sometimes you cannot duplicate what the simulation do. So you need really to exercise, in particular for a fighter, in flight. I may tell you, flight test center is very important. We have all the simulation, we have the bench, we have everything, but we need flight test. Why? Because sometime in the air, it's a different result that you expected when you are on the ground, and it's not in front of air forces that I have to convince them of this type of event. So we need demonstrators. Then back between the ops requirement, the simulation, the demonstrators, then we are back to the program. We have to launch a program. In this program, you will need to tune the ops requirement, then a clear specification from a program director coming from the 3 states, and industry will organize itself with prime responsibilities for some of the tasks, like some of the pillars, with partners, and that has to be really followed exactly what I'm saying now. This is really a key to succeed in the future, especially with fighters, because you all know that we cannot be degrading the performance of a fighter, because our competitors, in terms not of marketing, but in terms of potential threats, they are not in cooperation. Russia is not cooperating with I don't know who. China is not cooperating with I don't know who. The USA, which are not a threat but an ally, is not cooperating with I don't know who. They are developing their own weapons for their own countries. So cooperation is a constraint. Based on that, if we need it, that's a political decision, then we have to organize it in order to remain totally efficient and in order to deliver the right performances.
Thank you very much for your invitation, and especially thank you to the French Chief of Staff of the Air and Space Force. Of course, I'm very honored to be part of this panel and to try more or less to conclude. Perhaps lots has been said already, of course, so I will just try perhaps to echo what has been underlined, highlighted by the previous panelists. Let's say, just in a nutshell, just from the point of view of a national armament directorate, but nothing new, more or less, in my intervention today. First, a few words about the need to cooperate. Why do we need to cooperate? A very basic observation is that when you analyze the defense data in Europe over the past decades, it shows that on the one hand, unfortunately, our budgetary resources, they remain limited, but on the other hand, we recognize there is a real need to increase European security, because our continent has to face an increasing level of threat. The required investment to develop the systems that our armed forces need, in particular in the complex domain of aerospace, of course, they cannot be supported by one single country in this context. Building and maintaining a strong DTIB, Defense Industrial and Technological Base, is a key component of our independence and self-sufficiency. And of course, as has been said previously, this does require a continuous investment. So as a result, of course, it cannot be possible to meet these challenges ahead if each of us would act separately to acquire and maintain all these required capabilities. That's why, of course, cooperation is an absolute necessity. Developing collaborative programs is the way to get the proper leverage of our own investment, to make economies of scale, to reduce non-recurring costs, and of course to build synergies both at industrial and governmental levels. I just will try to highlight, to sum up what are the key conditions in order to obtain a successful cooperation. As has already been highlighted several times, first, the success of cooperation depends on the harmonization of the military requirements, but also perhaps I just want to highlight this as well on the harmonization between the schedules, because disalignment between calendars can also be sometimes a reason why we failed in the past. There is also a need when we compare, when we try to get lessons learned from the past, to avoid the multiplication of version or specific configurations, because somehow we could agree upon a core of military requirements and then devil being in details, coming to too many separate versions. From that regard, lessons could probably be learned from the helicopters programs, what we had with NH90, that is to be claimed an extreme case to that regard with too many versions, 22 versions, 60 standards. Beyond the harmonization of the technical requirements, it is of course also necessary to work on the convergence of doctrines. And that is also of course why the EI2 to that regard is very helpful and very promising for the future, because thanks to the common strategic culture it will contribute to build, it is going to be a very efficient way to foster in the long term virtuous cooperation schemes for future capability development. Then a few words on how to make our cooperation a success, how it has to be controlled and manageable. The pragmatic approach we try to favor from a French perspective is also to initiate a cooperation with a core number of countries, able to, of course, to commonly design projects with manageable risks. The partners, they must share, of course, common requirements, same operational concept, but also, if you allow me, common industrial ambitions. Armament programs, especially in the aerospace domain, they are, of course, from our point of view, too complex if you want to start from scratch with a too large number of countries. Of course, this does not mean that we do not want to open our cooperation later on to other stakeholders to enlarge it, but we think we have to be pragmatic from that regard. Once a project sufficiently matures around harmonized requirements, of course, then in the longer term, we favor participation of a larger number of countries. It can and it should be thought. It is, of course, beneficial from an operational standpoint because, of course, this is basic, but using the same equipment, it also structurally brings interoperability. Defining, let's say, what we could call a most efficient opening strategy for this project is also for us, therefore, a key issue. And to that regard, of course, the new European tools which are proposed to us, EDIDP, European Defence Fund, are, of course, huge opportunities on which we have to leverage. In our view, the objective of the fund is to foster the competitiveness of the EDTIB throughout the Union, of course, in order to contribute to our strategic autonomy, to our freedom of action by supporting cross-border collaboration, in particular with SMEs, mid-caps, and to improve the agility of our supply chain. And besides, EDF may also support new kind of cooperation, leading to also an increase of interoperability of our defense systems, General Parizeau, of course, has highlighted the different types of programs we are promoting to that regard within the PESCO, within the EDF. And I think that to standardize, you also need to gather all main industrial entities and actors of a given domain. That is to say, the governments, the forces are not the only stakeholders in order to promote, to develop this interoperability. We also have to leverage and to, let's say, rely on the industrial partners. Besides, and coming back to our cooperation and how to better govern it, also nothing new to what has been said before, but the necessary consistency of our choices requires a very strong, solid and effective governance at all levels, may it be the forces, the national armament directorates and the industrial levels. The key points for us really, but it was of course very well highlighted by Eric, for the success of the collaborative programs is the establishment of this efficient industrial organization. Once again, just trying to gain some return on experience of what we had in the past, we all know that geo-return rules, if they should be applied too strictly, they can lead to complex, under-optimized, artificially built arrangements which can dilute industrial responsibilities. We, for instance, have the example of the A400M engine, which is, let's say, an example of that regard, even if the engine itself is a very good one. We have a too complex industrial organizations that we do not want to duplicate. Our industrial organization must be based on the best skills, on the best athlete approach to lead each industrial pillar within the program. And it is under these conditions that we will be able to structure our industrial base for the long term with a fair balance between the countries. Once again, also to that regard, EDF can bring us support in order to increase our supply chain openness throughout Europe. And finally, this will also lead to EDTIB competitiveness. I just want to end with also some conditions which are key to us, which are about the ability to stay sovereign in terms of exportability of the systems. And of course, this does not mean that we are not willing to cooperate. We are very much willing to do it, but we are also convinced that industrial consolidation must not mean that we are in any manner willing to give up, let's say, our sovereignty in terms of being able to export the products of our cooperation. And of course, it makes sense that the countries, they can have and they will remain with different export policy because it's a very national matter. And so I do not call it a divergence between the countries. But then we have to find means in order to, at the same time, to be able to cooperate and to preserve our sovereign autonomy of decision with regard to our national export policies. We are firmly convinced this is feasible. We have managed to do it with Germany, where we have an overarching agreement back in October 19, which states that exportation of the equipment coming from cooperation programs, they cannot be blocked by any of the nation, and we are also willing to enlarge this agreement we have with Germany. We also have another one with UK, which is very much dedicated to the MBDA company, what we call the MBDA, one MBDA approach. And once again, it's very close to what Eric was mentioning about the MBDA Centers of Excellence. So it very much relies on this intergovernmental agreement. As a conclusion, cooperation is of course an absolute necessity, even if it's not an easy way. If we want to make cooperation a success, it's also a necessity to constantly strive to improve our schemes by learning from experience, learning from the past, to draw inspiration from our best practices and to share them, of course, between nations, and above all, to remain pragmatic.
Thank you very much for these brilliant presentations. We have 5 minutes left, and so maybe we have time for a question in the audience and maybe one question in online. So if there is anybody in the audience who wants to ask the first question. Well, then we'll go. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Do you mind rephrasing the question because with the mic, maybe because we.
Thank you. I'll try to speak up a bit. Matthias Hansson, Swedish Air Force. I'd just like to hear your views on how to maintain military and industrial cooperation up the conflict scale, so we make sure that we have the support we are used to in peacetime, even if push comes to shove, and we don't make cooperation a hampering issue in that context. Thank you.
No candidate.
Well, it's always a compromise, I guess. You know, it's if you have a common basic requirement, then if you try not to diverge too much from the operational standpoint, then I think the industry will follow what the military wants. So, taking the example of the NH-90, there was totally different views on what the helicopter had to do. But I think if we manage to talk together every time we upgrade the program, then we find common grounds. We had the experience of the C-160. It was a basic mission, and even though we managed to diverge from the German Air Force. So I think it's part of our job as military to stay focused on the main missions that the equipment can have to perform, and then stay reasonable on what we want to do for the next step.
Yeah, maybe I can add, what we see is that I think we draw also a lot of learnings and lessons learned from previous projects like the A400M, where we saw that the fragmentation of the different requirements led to a lot of complexity. We see that in the FCAS, for example, we started with 10 proposals for the system architecture. We proposed that through the 3 air chiefs, and they chose in the first step 5, and now they will bring it down to one common specification that will be then the requirement for the demonstrator. So I think it shows that once you start collaboration, you have to make compromises. I think you cannot get everything, otherwise you start another problematic requirement like we had for the A400M. But I can see there's a strong involvement over time and a strong willingness to do the right compromises in order to create a better system for a stronger collaboration.
Maybe something to add based on our experience. As was mentioned before, it is very important from the start to be very clear about the operational need that we are trying to fulfill, but also about what is shared and what is not shared between the various nations. And as was just mentioned, we, on the industrial side, totally abide and totally follow what our customers are asking us to do, and this is we do. And after that, at least for MBDA, we have the ability to support the various customers locally based on what has been procured.
I'm not sure we have time for the last question, so I'd just like to thank you very much for this panel and conclude with the fact that if technology is absolutely crucial, the human factor, as you said, Mr. Trappier, is absolutely crucial, and today we had the best athletes we can have to talk about this, so thank you very much.
Thank you all for your presence here today, this morning, and thank you for those watching us online. We propose you to make a break for this afternoon and to come back with you this afternoon at 13:40, so we'll have a little more than an hour of pause. We can be offline now, please.